Okay, I just went for a little run, and I was doing some thinking, and I wanted to make an addition to the video I made earlier today. The title of that video is Paul's message to the church at the Colossians, and so I was what inspired me to make that video was a guy by the name of Brett Kunkel, who took out of context and completely flipped it on its head, the real message from Colossians 2 verses 16 and 17, and I pretty much went in depth in that message on exactly what Paul's message was and who he was speaking to show that this guy was Brett Kunkel was spreading a false message. And now he used another verse in this video that he made where he's condoning Christianity so sarcastically, and that verse was Romans chapter 14 verse 5. But before I do that, before I read that verse, I'm going to do exactly what I did in the last video, and I'm going to go back to the beginning of the chapter of Romans, and in my Bible, right here at the beginning of every chapter in my Bible, it gives detailed descriptions of who wrote the book, why it was written, so forth and so on. Who wrote this book? The Apostle Paul wrote about the grace of God, both from experience and education. It was written, Paul wrote, number one, to introduce himself to believers in Rome and enlist their help in spreading the gospel. Number two, to develop and defend the truth of the gospel he had been preaching. Number three, to encourage the Roman believers to rely solely on God's grace for their salvation. I'm going to read that again. Number three, to encourage the Roman believers to rely solely on God's grace for their salvation. Okay, when and whom was it written? When and to whom was it written? Romans was probably written in AD 57 to believers, most of them Gentile, in the capital city of the Roman Empire. Now, what to look for in Romans? Watch for the major themes of faith, grace, righteousness, and justification. You'll find the foundation, vital teaching on faith in the first 11 chapters. Then, in the last 5 chapters, you'll discover practical implications of faith, how the teaching works out in everyday life. Now, it's important to note that in this time, you had groups of people such as the Essenes, who were engaging in what is called legalism. I studied legalism a few years ago. And basically, in this time, you had a lot of people practicing Jewish laws. And now, what Paul was here speaking, he was speaking to the Gentile believers. And I'm going to get to chapter 4, verse 5 in a second. But it's important to lay a foundation so you can understand exactly why Paul went to speak his message. Now, prior to Christ's arrival, there was what was called legalism, and it was very prevalent. And what legalism was, now these people, remember, in this time, they were praying for the Messiah. They were looking for the Messiah. They were ready to be delivered. And legalism is basically the practice of actions and of works in order to achieve salvation. So they believed that if they abided by or they followed these Jewish laws to a T without fail, that they could achieve divinity, which is impossible because Christ came to establish the law so that the law could not be fulfilled. Christ set the bar too high on purpose so that we have to rely on Him to achieve salvation. There's nothing we can do. There's no act. There's no act of kindness or anything that we can do to achieve our salvation. These legalistic practices were very popular in those days. And so the believers, the Gentile believers in this day, were basically converting over from following these Jewish laws and converting into Christianity. And so that's why Paul wrote this book, and that was his message in chapter 14, verse 5. And I'm going to get to that. Chapter 14, verse 5. Lost it. Hold on. Okay. Chapter 14, verse 5. One man considers one day more sacred than another. Another man considers every day alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. He who regards one day as special does so to the Lord. He who eats meat eats to the Lord. I'm in chapter 6 now. For he gives thanks to God, and he who abstains does so to the Lord and gives thanks to God. That was Romans chapter 14, verses 5 and 6. Now, Paul made it very clear in Colossians that we are not to engage in the mixing of God's holy days with man-made traditions or pagan holidays. Okay, he made that in no uncertain terms. He made it clear. And Christmas is pagan in nature, so is Easter, and we are not to practice Christmas or celebrate Christmas. This chapter 5 is in no way referring to people who celebrate Christmas. It's specifically speaking to these Gentile believers new in their faith and telling them not to judge one another, for one person basically maybe more further along in adopting the Christian faith and moving away from this legalistic practice. Okay, but it's not for one man to judge another man on where he is in that process. Okay, that's what he's saying. He's not in any way saying that it's okay to celebrate Christmas or Easter. He's not saying that. That's not even close to what his message was. It's completely out of context. It's very clear, but you have to first of all get into the Word, read the Word, and when you understand what was going on in the day, okay, what the problems were, where these believers were being led astray, and how Paul was sent to them to speak to them to get them back in line, back on track, if you will. So he was telling them not to judge one another. And I don't judge anyone who celebrates Christmas. If you want to celebrate Christmas, celebrate Christmas. It's fine. But I just, if I'm challenged by someone saying that Christmas is okay, I'm going to, in my own good faith and due diligence, go and research and find and seek exactly what the Word says. And it's clear once you get into it. Seek and you shall find.